Kia ora, no mai, haere mai. Welcome along to the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. I'm Kirsty Salisbury, your host of your show if you haven't been here before. And today we are in season 13. This is episode 10, which is usually a roundup episode, a solo episode where we look back over the previous 10 episodes that we've had, the conversations we've had. We pull out the themes, we look at the highlights and discuss all of the content that's come in the last season. I am going to be doing that today. However, this is not the last episode of the season. I've still got a couple of conversations to include. Sometimes life happens, sometimes people get sick or we're traveling or life is just busy and we can't quite connect for the time to do the interviews. So whilst this is episode 10, there's a couple more conversations to come all around this amazing topic that season 13 is focused on, which is, what is it like to die? What happens in the moments of death? What happens at the bedside? What happens for the person who is transitioning, who is dying, for the loved ones? And what themes can we take away from looking into these experiences? I have really loved the season. I've loved hearing from our guests. I've loved hearing all of the conversations, the experiences. I've also had an overwhelming amount of people write into me, which I love. It's been amazing writing into me with their feedback, with their own experiences and sharing some things that have happened to them. Because as we went through the season and we heard from different people and we heard different things that happen in these moments of death, people were saying, oh, that happened to me. Or I was in the room when so-and-so saw something and there was a light, or they saw a past loved one. So I want to say thank you to everybody who wrote into me. Today, I'm going to include some of those stories, and I greatly appreciate it because what that does is it gives me, I guess, a bit of affirmation on the conversations that we hear that every day people are having these experiences. It's not just the people that are doing the research. It's not just the medical professionals, that all over the world, everyday people are having these experiences. So I think that's beautiful. It really validates the conversations that we're having. And I think there's something quite special in that. So today we are hearing from some people. We are looking at the themes of this conversation we've been having, taking snippets from all of the people that have been on, the things that they've shared with us, and pulling it all together as kind of like a wrap-up episode, even though there's 2 more episodes coming. So one of the things that I want to start with is just how personal death is, how unique it is for the individual, that we do it all very differently. And whilst there are themes, it isn't something that you can say, okay, here's the steps, and we go through step 1, 2, 3, 4, right up to the point of when we die. There are similarities, but it's not necessarily the same. We may go through some of the steps that people have highlighted in the season. We may go through them faster than others. Some people may linger at one of the particular stages of death for months, possibly even years, can really stay in that one spot. Other people transition through them very, very quickly. And death is just such a unique personal thing. So can we do it wrong? This was a question I was asked. Can we do death wrong? You may want to challenge me on that. I don't think we can. I think the way that we do death well is to really acknowledge it, to talk about it, to prepare for it. And that's through having conversations or putting together our affairs if we've got things which are outstanding, not leaving a big messy trail behind us. I think that's one way that we can do death well. I think we can do death well by understanding that it happens to all of us. Understanding that it is unique and understanding that however it presents for us, that is okay, rather than trying to fight it. Now, I'm not saying we don't push through things. Sometimes it is worth having a bit of fight, putting a bit of effort in. But I think also acknowledging what death is. And I really loved, it was Helen Callanan that actually said this. She said, what if death was just a transition into the next thing that waits for us? What if we didn't look at death as the end of and a very dramatic finishing thing? What if it was just a transition and we could accept that? And I think that comment's really stayed with me, because part of me thinks that actually, yes, it is just a transition. We don't know what's next. But one of the themes that has come through is just how much people communicate after their time, how it doesn't seem to be the end. So many people have talked about how the relationship can continue, how they have the communication with their past loved ones, seeing past loved ones before the moment of death. So death is very unique, very personal. I don't think we can do it wrong if we respect the process. Yeah, there's a lot we could say around that. I'm aware that I'm talking on a very sensitive topic, and we've all had individual experiences around it. My intention is not to upset anyone. It's not to be abrupt. It's to respect that process and ask that we would consider what death means for us. How do we do death well? What is death for us? What is a good death for us personally? So, in saying that, some of the themes that came through were what I've just touched on: many people having experiences where they saw past loved ones, whether that's at the foot of the bed, whether it's in the room, whether it was in a dream or a vision. We had Dr. Christopher Kerr come on, and he was talking about how a lot of people have pre-death dreams, and those dreams are very, very significant in the healing and preparing. And often it was to resolve things that had happened in their lifetime before they died. So preempting death. Very, very interesting. Go back and have a listen if you haven't seen that episode. He talked about things like that. I found that amazing, to think that our dreams, subconsciously, we could be trying to prepare for our upcoming death. People get visits from past loved ones. It's a very, very common thing. And it's wonderful, because I think within medical professions now, there are certain signposts that are there to indicate when someone might die. And like I said earlier, they don't necessarily happen at the same pace. We can't say, okay, this happened, which means they have X amount of time left, or this happened, which means we've got 4 more steps and then it's getting close. We can't do that. People may skip steps. People may spend longer at them. But seeing a past loved one, someone who's died already, is a very common sign when you're getting quite close to the end. Whether they knew them in this lifetime, I find this really interesting, because in the conversations I've been having, sometimes they'll see a past loved one and it's not from their lifetime. It may have been the great, great, great grandfather or uncle or aunt or something like that, who they never lived in the same time with. But there's just an understanding of who that is. And I find that fascinating. But people often see their loved ones, often their spouse, if the spouse has already died, or their children, or someone there that they can connect with. Very, very common that this happens at the end of life. Now, what do we do when this happens? We don't shut them down and say, oh, don't be ridiculous, I can't see anything in the room, because it doesn't achieve very much. It's known about well enough now that actually, if we can just go with it, ask some questions, just embrace it, then that can be the most useful thing. And my gut feel is, if somebody says it's happening, it's happening. It very, very likely is happening. The question is, can it be the medication? Is it possible that it's just the medication coming in and causing hallucinations or messing with thought patterns or understanding? Sure, there may be an element to that, but it's now so common that this happens in the final stages of life, that I think if we can just go with it, let the person have a conversation. How does that harm us? It doesn't. Let the person have a conversation and go with what's happening in the room. So seeing past loved ones, it's amazing. I expect there's quite a lot of healing. Quite often people talk about how that person's coming to collect them. And I was really interested just in our latest episode, Dr. Peter Fennick. He was talking about this, and he was talking about how people see things and they have a set time. And maybe they're talking with their spiritual team and they're going, okay, well, so I'm ready to die on Tuesday, but I don't want to die on Tuesday. Maybe we can make it Friday. And it's almost like they get out the spiritual calendar and they have a look and they work it all out. Who's going to be there? Is anybody coming from another place? Or are we waiting on anyone to arrive? Or what's going to be happening in life at that time? And seeing whether you could reschedule death or bring it forward for whatever circumstance. I was really challenged by that when he said that. I thought that was very interesting, that perhaps death, the moment of death, can change. Of course, we wouldn't know that it's changed because it happens when it happens. But can it be brought forward? Can it be delayed? I don't know. I think we have quite a bit of power, or power is probably not the right word, a lot of control over when that moment comes. And I'll go through some experiences as well that people have written into me with. But it seems that there is some control over whether they'll wait until everybody just leaves the room and then slip out that time, or wait for somebody who's trying to get there isn't there, wait till everybody's in the room. It seems like we can have a little bit of control over to that moment of death. We might not know that we do. We might not understand how to impact that, but I think something's happening on the bigger picture. So when people experience past loved ones at the end, maybe there's a bit of that going on, a bit of that negotiation. When are we doing this? Because people talk about how somebody came to collect them or is there for them. Sometimes they say, I'll come back on Friday. And then on Friday, they tell people, then on Friday they die. So who knows? It's fascinating. So we've learned that death is very personal. We've learned that people often experience visits from loved ones, past loved ones, people that have died already. Terminal lucidity, where the person will have a sudden surge of energy and maybe they seem very lucid. They want to have a conversation. They seem very alert. Quite often they want food. And I shared in one of the episodes the experience that I had with my own grandmother around this. We were trying to get her a roast meal. People may seem just completely fine for a short period of time. And you start to think, oh, they're getting better. It's going to be okay. Or this isn't their time. And actually, it's an indicator that they're very, very close to passing. So terminal lucidity, that surge of energy, I'm not quite sure how it comes, where it comes from. And I guess it's probably different for each individual how long that lasts for. Sometimes it's quite short. Other times it could go on for 15, 20 minutes, possibly a bit longer. I'm not actually 100% sure. But terminal lucidity, that surge of energy, have a great conversation, maybe establish a few things, get a few things sorted, a moment where you can have a quality conversation. And yeah, quite often they're asking for food, which is another interesting sign. Whether their body can process the food or not, that's a whole nother story. But the surge of energy, usually within 24 to 48 hours of them passing. And like I said, this has now been recognized within medical facilities and is one of the key markers that somebody is about to pass. Now, we've talked about how we may have some control about waiting for our time of death. Do we have control as to when the moment happens? I don't know. We've seen in other seasons, season 11, where we talked about after-death communication, where people had messages from their loved ones who had died. It seems through that there may be some understanding that we might know when we're about to die. So some of the conversations we had were more about sudden death rather than an illness which took X amount of weeks or months, possibly even years. Sudden death, people perceive that they're going to die. They've just got a gut feeling that they're going to die. So sometimes people have this right at the end stage of life. They say, well, it's going to happen on this day. There seems to be that element of control. And then there's often a lot of communication after the moment happens. Feeling in the room, that the room fills with energy. People talk about a light. Often there's a bright light. And I'll share one of those examples in the parts that people have written in with, the messages that they've written in with. There's an element of feeling the energy, feeling the light, feeling the change within the room. And it's quite difficult to put words on that to describe that. But again, very, very similar. So we've got all of the things that lead up to it. After that moment of transition, we've got how everything feels. And then people have written in with messages of communication after death. So where they're coming back, and usually the message is, I'm okay, everything's going to be all right. But sometimes the messages are about certain things. And I just think it's beautiful. I think it's amazing. I really question how death is the end. Now, I know not everybody agrees with that. Coming back to Helen's quote, perhaps it's just a transition. What if we could look at death as a transition rather than a loss? It's something we go through. But very reassuring, all these messages of after-death communication, that I'm okay, there is something else, everything's all right, and you're loved and supported is quite often the messages that come through. Okay, I'm going to share some of the stories from people who have written in. And if you have written in, thank you very much. Also, I really appreciate all of your help to share the videos. So on YouTube, sharing them, all your comments. I try and get to them all. Sometimes it's a bit hard. I try and reply to the emails. Just bear with me if you haven't received your reply yet. But I want to say thank you. I do greatly appreciate it. It really helps to get these messages out there, and that's fantastic. It's really great. Okay, so Michelle wrote in, and Michelle said, I've been around a tremendous amount of death since I was young. Michelle, my heart goes out to you because that sounds really tough. She says, with my dad, there was nothing unusual except for at the funeral, when we were having the meal, the light went out 3 times in succession. I felt it was him. My husband always writes notes for me, and after he died in 2014, suddenly I found for years the notes in my clothes, in my shoes. They were everywhere. It had to have been him. My aunt, who I loved like a mother, I held her for a week as she deteriorated rapidly, waiting on a sister who came to baptize her. When she arrived and performed the baptism, my aunt then died in our arms less than 3 minutes later. That week, her home felt happy, and I saw orb lights dancing around the room. She used to talk to people she's loved in the past, and I would ask, are they here? And she nodded and smiled and said, yes. It was so beautiful. My husband's grandparents were together for a very, very long time, and when she died, he then died 12 hours later. So thank you, Michelle, for sharing that. Yes, the dying quite close together, even if one partner seems healthy as anything, often people die within a very short time together. 12 hours is quite quick, but sometimes it might be a few days or a week or a month quite close together. It's almost like they lose the will to live. So people have been married for years and years and years. You hear of them dying quite close together. So there we go. Thank you, Michelle. I love the orb lights dancing around the house and just feeling happy, feeling like she's there. And it sounds like she also had that experience of talking to people, seeing past loved ones in the room and responding to them. So Mike wrote in and shared, my sister transitioned to the other side on June the 30th. She was placed under hospice care here at the house where we were up until her last day. She didn't seem to have any nearing death experience, but only just a hint of what was happening. She would seem to stare towards the ceiling, especially at one of the corner areas, and at one time we asked what she was looking at. She just said, the light and the ceiling fan. The light in the room wasn't on at that time, and I wondered if she was seeing the light. We were with her at her bedside when she took her last breath, and she's dearly loved and will be missed by all of us. Thank you, Mike. I'm sorry that you lost your sister. The light in the corner of the room. People talk about seeing the light, the bright light within the room, and nobody else in the room can see it. I think it's amazing. So thank you for sharing that. Kerry says, my dad passed in 2010, and my mum passed almost 2 years after. Mum had not been well for the 2 years with Pick's disease, which is a type of dementia, and by the time her journey was at the end, she was no longer able to recognise anyone or speak. Mum was fortunate enough to be at home for her final days. As I entered her bedroom, she looked directly at me and was nodding for me to look next to me as though someone else was there, which in itself was odd because she had been absent for so long. As the day wore on, more family arrived until the house was quite crowded. I took a break from her bedside and went into the quiet of the kitchen. As I entered, I heard my deceased dad say, "That's enough for me here, Cal." I could only assume that it was my dad that my mum had seen standing next to me in her bedroom. I wasn't shocked to hear my dad's voice. I just heard it and carried on. But now I look back and I wish I'd continued that conversation. I can bet. Now, Nancy wrote in and she said, "I thought this latest podcast episode was extremely moving. It reminded me of my own experience with the deaths of my father and my mother. I was at my father's bedside for the many weeks before he died. For a week or so before he died, my father seemed to sleep a lot. And again, that's one of these indicators that somebody's about to die, is the closer we get to death, often the more we sleep. We spend less time awake. Our body is in a state of shutting down, transitioning. We've talked about how perhaps we're between two realms, and that can happen through sleep. But anyway, back to Nancy's story. She said, "I was at my father's bedside for the many weeks before he died. For a week or so before he died, he seemed to sleep a lot. The doctor described him as semi-comatose. At the beginning of the end, he suddenly opened his eyes wide and he began staring up towards the ceiling at the far end of his bed. He was looking from one side to the other. I tried to see what he was looking at, but saw nothing. Sometime later that evening, he began having tremendous difficulty breathing. I tried to teach him how to meditate, knowing that in meditation he would need less air and might be more relaxed." Gosh, I love that. That's so cool. He tried it, but he could not do it. He looked at me after having said nothing for days, and he said, "I see. I understand now." He looked at my mother and he said, "I love you." He then looked at me and said, "I love you." He gasped, and then he was gone. I find my belief in reincarnation has made me unafraid of death. I grieved the loss of loved ones, but feel sure that there is a state beyond this physical world that is much more real and essential to our existence. That's just amazing. How special that you were able to be there right at the end. And it's almost an honor, I think. I think that's very beautiful. Thank you so much, Nancy, for sharing that with us. I'll just jump in with a personal story that I had, because often we have people talking before they die as well. And it may seem that there's no one in the room. Who are they talking to? What are they looking at? I do some work at hospice, and I was in a patient's room recently, and they looked up and they started talking gibberish. And I got a bit excited because I thought, oh, I'm going to witness this. This is going to be exciting. And the person with them said, "Oh, look, don't worry, this keeps happening. Just ignore him." And I ended up talking to the family member, but I couldn't switch off from the talking that wasn't making any sense, but he was definitely talking to somebody within the room, and just fascinating. Unfortunately, I had to leave, so don't know how that went, but it's very, very common. So Thomas wrote in and said, "For 5 years now, I've taken care of my aunt and her daughter, who were both very sick and bed-stricken. My aunt died last April in the hospital. My wife and I came 10 minutes into the room too late, and she had already passed. When we went to the home of her daughter, who was my cousin, to tell her the sad news, and actually you need to know she was in a mentally impaired state, so she could not make anything up. She only lived in that very moment. The nurse who was at her side on this day told us about the time when her mother died. My cousin saw her mother standing right in front of her. She didn't know her mother was in the hospital, let alone that she had died. And since I know my cousin very, very well, she's a reliable witness for me. I have no doubt about what she saw." Isn't that amazing? We have that in season 11 as well, about the after-death communication, when people have visits from people right at the moment of death, or they feel them in the room, or they've just got a knowing that someone has died. And it just goes to show we are not purely physical. Being physical is a massive element of our life here, but there's something greater, there's something bigger. And so that wraps up pretty much the overview of the season. remembering we've got at least one, possibly two more interviews to come. I hope that you've got lots out of it, because I certainly have. I very much follow where I feel spiritually led to go with the conversation. I try and keep it very open. I don't have a whole lot of structure going on. And I really felt led to go down this track, to talk about these beautiful things, to share some of these experiences and have this conversation. And I feel like I've learned so much, because I'm here sharing my thoughts with you. I'm here chatting with guests, but I'm also out there with people who are dying and researching and reading and trying to learn as much as I can about these topics. And I think it's been very insightful. So I hope that everybody listening has got something valuable out of it. We are going to go back to more stories from near-death experiences. I did have a few emails saying, hey, what about the NDEs? Where are they gone? I want to hear about that, not about people dying. That's okay. I felt led to go here for the season. I feel led that season 14 is back to being about near-death experiences. So I hope you'll join us for that. This is the last episode for the year. So this is being released early December in 2022. I will be taking the summer off with my family to have some downtime, some Christmas time, plus also to plan out the next season and get some of those episodes recorded. And we'll be back again when my daughter goes back to school, which is late January, may even be the 31st of January. So possibly early February. But I want to thank you. What a year we've had. We have got the Consciously Creating Workbook, so stepping into 2023. Every year I talk about how New Year's Eve, New Year's Day is the most significant day of the year for me. You can forget birthdays, Christmas, all of those other holidays. I think they're important. But for me, I'm very, very conscious about the energy that I take out of this year into the next year, and being really grateful and thankful for all of the things that have happened in this year. So if you'd like to get hold of the free workbook, this is just a workbook which I release most years, and it's got different questions, and it talks about how we can acknowledge the year we've had, energy we need to leave behind, energy we want to take. It's about being very conscious and specific about how we want to start our year. And the other tradition I have, which I've done with my family for many, many years, is rather than staying up really late on New Year's Eve and sleeping in on New Year's Day, staying up past midnight, welcoming it in, sleeping in, we do it the other way around. We go to bed really early on New Year's Eve and get up at 4 o'clock on New Year's Day and go and watch the sunrise. And this is where I feel like all of the time that I put into intentionally sitting down and creating stuff and journaling and centering myself in the energy that I have and understanding where I'm at right now, on that day when that sun comes up, when that first little peak of sun comes up through the clouds, sometimes it's raining, but hopefully it's not going to rain this year. That for me is when it all sort of kicks into gear, and it's such a special, significant moment. It can feel very, very powerful. Something to think about. If you'd like a copy of the workbook, the link is in the notes below. So just go down there, click on the link, you'll go through, put in your email, and you can get a copy of that workbook. And it also includes the list of 100 things. So 100 things that you want to do over a year. And that's not to be committed to feel like you've got a task list or you might fail or anything like that. It's to expand our life and to open up our thinking and create opportunities, create experiences. Because whilst we're here having this spiritual experience, I'm all about having this physical experience and making the most of it and living a big, juicy life. So that's pretty much it. Gosh, I just talked for a whole lot of time, didn't I? I hope you are well. I wish you a fantastic end of the year. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for sharing the podcast with your friends and with whoever. The more it gets shared, the more I can put episodes out. Thank you for your support, and I wish you all the best.